Is writing essay in manga automatically bad? If not, then how do you write? And as a manga writer who deals with mature themes in their content, I'm going to show you how. But let's address the elephant in the room first. Is writing essay into manga automatically bad? No, absolutely not. It is a very valuable tool to explore the human experience and other complex topics, whether it be individual or societal. And there are a couple rules that you want to follow when writing essay. And the most important rule above everything else is respect for the subject matter that you are writing. You have to recognize as a creator, just as I do, that you will impact real life people with these stories. And if you are not handling these subjects respectfully, you need to understand that you will be doing harm to real people. The second most important question when you want to engage in these subject matters is asking yourself, why do I need to do this? Is there another alternative for this? If you want to use essay as kind of a gag joke, like he gropes her and everyone's like, funny. No, don't do it. Sexual assault and sexual harassment is not funny. And we are going to be excluding parody and satire from this discussion because they are complex topics just on their own. And they can get away with a lot more than a traditional story that is trying to tell some kind of message. But if you're going to be writing essay to explore the human condition, the main character's development, or an aspect of the world that cannot be substituted, aka Goblin Slayer, is a bad example of world building with essay. And Fire Punch, Chainsaw Man's original creation, is also a bad example. But when you're going to be dealing with character development, essay just can't happen and the main character never deal with it, because then it looks like you're doing it for shock value. Essay needs to be something the character has to deal with in the long term. It is not something that they just automatically get over. It is a process of realizing their body autonomy. That there's a lot of emotions and feelings that go into this. And if you're going to deal with essay to your main cast, you have to be willing to put in the work for them to either overcome it or to succumb to it. And you can also explore societal things such as drinking, peer pressure, and how do people and society as a whole react to essay victims? Do they believe them? Do they believe men can be essay? And if you're writing a fantasy story, how are the other races treated? Do they get the same rights and seriousness of essay when it happens to them, or do they get viewed more like animals? Now, as always, we're going to take an actual deep dive into the series, so let's talk about my graphic novel, Devil's Deal, and how Selma overcame hers. And overcome actually wouldn't be a right word, how she deals with it. So as we know, within the Devil's Deal, Selma and Yusar are married. In fact, they have 2 kids together. And for the most part, with their situation being what it is, they're actually really happy with their life. But when Selma was 16, she went to a party to be able to feel what it's like to actually be a normal kid. Because of those of you who don't know, Ira is her mother, and she is the biggest town whore. She is the most popular, and Selma has spent her life living in the shadow of the sex industry, specifically the twisted, cruel version of her mother's sexual industry. So needless to say, Selma's always had a very complex relationship with sex. And looking to break away from the title of the daughter of the town's whore, she decided to go to this party. And she decided to drink. And Yuso was drinking. And this was the time that they first started talking. And it was here that they both got super wasted and decided to sleep together. And because of that night, Selma got 2 goblins and a husband. So some of you may already be saying, well, that's not too bad. Where does the sexual assault come in? Well, the thing is, some people might actually consider what happened that night to be essay. Now, who's the assaulter? That's up for debate. Was anyone an assaulter? That's also up for debate. But because we are dealing with substances that alter the mental state and ability to consent for people, this is where these topics become very complex. And we already know that we cannot base a perpetrator based on race, gender, or sex. So if people want to make the argument, well, Yuso's the perpetrator because even though that they were both intoxicated, he's the perpetrator because he's a guy. Well, that may not necessarily be true, because then you have the other argument that, well, Selma initiated the conversation that led to it so she could be the perpetrator. But the reality is a lot more complex than that, because even in this drunken state, neither could consent, but when they both walked away from it, neither of them had any regret. Neither of them felt assaulted. Am I saying that this is the end-all be-all solution to this very complex subject? Absolutely not. I'm not going to make that argument. I'm not going to try to make that argument. But what I can do is, at least from my perspective in this story, knowing exactly how both characters felt, is what allowed me to continue building their relationship, because in Selma's eyes, she wasn't assaulted. And in Yuso's eyes, he wasn't assaulted. So it wasn't an unforgivable crime, in their eyes, which has enabled them to come together as a happy couple. However, Selma will not take back shots. Selma will not give BJs. Selma will not be cooned on anywhere on her body except for in her. And she will only let her husband take her on her back while they look at each other. And so you may be saying, wow, that is extremely restrictive. Why does she have all of these restrictions in place? Well, the answer is mostly because of her mother. Her mother was a town whore, and she took it all. She would take back shots, double shots, Eiffel Towers. She would let people use her body in all sorts of ways, but there was one thing she would never do. Ira would never look a client in the eye when she was on her back. And that's because Ira had always felt that that was way too personal, even though she's willing to break all those other boundaries. And having to follow in her mother's footsteps and put her children through what she went through is a fate worse than death for her. And Yuso is well aware of this, and that's why he never pushes her boundaries. He respects her choice, and he works within what she gives him. Before I end this video, I want to leave two things. One is there's a lot of ways to do essay in stories right, but a hell of a lot more ways to do them wrong. And two, even though we have just discussed an example of a very negative figure within the sex worker field, that is not a portrayal of the entire industry. There are wonderful sex workers out there, and they do not all follow in Ira's footsteps. And even within my own series, we will see positive figures within the sex working industry. Even though you can read Devil's Deal online for free, don't forget to pick yourself up a physical copy.